It's been a challenging year for many of us, and while adults around the world are grappling with new ways of working, connecting, and interacting, young adults are navigating those same challenges while going through a critical developmental phase. So, what have we learned about what they're dealing with, and how can we help? Kids, COVID, and the new abnormal. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 9th annual Girl Power Hour event in support of Lionheart Foundation. I'm Dave Kelly, and I'm so proud to be part of what may be the biggest event of the year supporting youth mental health in our community. And with the help of 3 incredible professionals on our panel, you're going to meet them in just a bit. They're going to help educate all of us on things like what are they seeing with youth through COVID and what should we be watching for around our young people, how parents can help, and where do I go if I need help or someone I know needs help. Now, some of you watching and like me, we're concerned parents, some of you are supporters, but all of us want the best for our young people, especially now when all of us are a little more stressed than we'd like. And also, 6 months from now, the same people will reconvene for another free digital session to talk a bit about what they've seen since now and what additional advice they might have for families. And now I get to bring on 3 great people for a conversation. All 3 of our panelists are resident youth mental health experts. They work on the front line for kids and adolescents, whether treating in hospital settings or therapy sessions, and who are or have been dealing with the elevated effects of COVID on an already amped population of kids and adolescents. And our first is Dr. April Elliott. April is a pediatrician and an adolescent medicine specialist with 20, I almost said 21. I was going to give you an extra year there, April, if you wanted it, years experience. She's also an adolescent health and well-being community advocate, author of multiple publications, including and on things like eating disorders, adolescent brain development, and youth experiencing homelessness. April, thanks so much for being here.
So much, Dave.
Do you want 20 or 21 years? It's up to you. You can have whichever.
It feels like 30. So.
Now, I talked to you before we started recording about your sense of how things are going, and you use the word tsunami. Give us a sense of what you mean by what young people are going through with COVID.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in starting, even before pre-COVID, we were seeing an increase in young people who were presenting with anxiety, depression, and just overall more incidents of eating disorders. And as the pandemic started to move into months, we started to see those numbers increase exponentially. So we already had an epidemic of mental health in young people, and it really just got worse during the pandemic.
Well, something I noticed with you and our other 2 panelists is amidst all of the stress, somehow you're still smiling and you still like doing the work you do. Why do you do it?
Wow. Well, I think for me, I go back to intent. And I always think about intention versus attention. And my intent really is to be that safe space for young people and their family. I look at everyone, all humans, as biopsychosocial beings. And although I'm a medical doctor, I went into this area because I see such potential in young people. And this time of uncertainty, of social isolation, and all of the impact of COVID has had such a significant impact on their growth and development. And that's why I went into this area, to potentiate that growth and development. So, that's what keeps me smiling, is when I meet with a young person and I get the feedback, wow, like I feel better just having had this conversation. It takes me back to my sort of core value that relationships are healing. And even though the ground is unsteady, you can ground people in relationships. So that's why I keep smiling, is I feel like I'm doing some of my basic values through this work.
Huh. Well, it's funny. I feel better just talking to you. So That's a relief. We think we're here to talk about youth, but really this is a big group therapy session to try to fix me. I don't know if we have enough time, but I really appreciate it.
I don't actually think we have enough time.
I knew it. I knew it. Okay, well, April, stay with us. I'm going to bring you back and we're going to talk more. We're going to talk further with the whole panel, okay?
Thanks, Dave.
Now I'd like you to meet Rochelle Paperny. She has her PhD. She's a registered psychologist with over 30 years experience working in the mental health field. She's a university professor, a researcher, a consultant, a speaker, and a therapist, and we're so lucky she's here. Hi, Rochelle.
Hi, Dave.
Nice to I'm so glad. Now, from the work you're doing, the same I asked April, give us a snapshot of how you see COVID affecting young people.
Yeah, as soon as the pandemic hit, as an attachment specialist, I was really concerned because of all the disconnection, the required restrictions, what it meant for isolation. And, it soon showed itself. Cases started to appear in my practice where there were no issues prior to COVID. Kids appearing with anxiety, panic attacks that they'd never had before. And then the cases where there was pre-existing anxiety, the sanctioned isolation as well as the validation of the fears just exacerbated that anxiety, and it gave them reason to believe that their anxiety was, certainly justified. And so it just became more extreme. And then I guess on the other end, I have teenage, young adult kids, and just seeing the impact on just that containment when they're supposed to be going out and exploring, that developmental arrest or arrested development, that pause button that was put on them. So these are some of the things that I've been seeing.
And it's like, I listen to you talk, it's more than just saying, well, so they don't get a grad, we'll have a party in the yard. It's a lot more than that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't know the long-term effect. We're going to be watching, I think, this particular cohort for quite a while and seeing the long-term effects. And hopefully we'll be able to mitigate them with, attention and awareness and intervention.
I'll ask you the same question I asked April. Given the stress of this and the work of this, why do you continue to do what you do?
Yeah. I think, the days when I see the capacity for people to change, to not see themselves as their symptoms and broken, but to really see symptoms as a sign of coping. Just it's sort of like their nervous system that takes over, and it's a useful protective mechanism. It's not who they are, and that things can heal, and that they don't just need to manage it, they can actually be free of it. And I see it time and time again. And wow, I'm floored, and that jazzes me. That's when I drive home and just go, that was a great day. I'm walking on the air.
That's excellent. And again, if you're watching and you're feeling what Peter felt years ago, and you're desperate or afraid or unsure, there's folks like Rochelle who are going to help us. So stay with us, Rochelle. We're going to bring you back to have a panel conversation before I introduce our next panelist, okay?
Yeah.
Danelle Spence is a registered psychologist with over 25 years of experience working with youth and families. She has worked in children's hospitals, eating disorder clinics, adolescent specialist center, private schools, and private practice. She's an author, a speaker, a former teacher, and we're thrilled she's here. Hi, Danelle.
Hi, Dave.
Nice to have you back. Tell me about, since like a year ago when we talked, what has been your experience with mental health with young people in the past 18 months of COVID?
Well, last year, when we did Power Hour, I guess I was optimistic and hopeful, and I saw some positives. I know when we do the panel later on, we'll speak to a few of the positives that we can see with COVID, and I was seeing it last year this time. I was seeing, okay, we're slowing down, we're spending more quality time with our families, we're learning to make sourdough bread, we're doing lots of right brain stuff, we're pausing, we're reflecting more. It was a slower pace. Since then, I would say I'm changing my mind, because it's, yes, all that stuff is amazing, and there is that, but I've noticed I get a call or an email every day, and it's hard to keep up. It's hard to support. It's hard to ensure that everyone is taken care of. And with the teens, I see lots of fatigue, lots of frustration, lots more anxiety, obviously, lots more eating disorders, but just really having a hard time pivoting and changing and adjusting to the continuation of COVID.
So, I mean, it's your job, but what keeps you doing this? What keeps you in this field?
Well, I feel like I just want to say what Rochelle and April said. Can I say that?
Yes,
Save
you
us some
can.
time. But truly, it is. I have been a helper my whole life. As soon as I was 17 and watching Growing Pains, I wanted to be Mr. Seaver. I think that was his name. But I love this. It fills me up. I really like what Rochelle was saying. Is the capacity to change, and I know. Relationships, just building those relationships. And I mean, the world, I always look at, okay, are we safe? Are people safe? Is the world safe? There's a lot of unknowns where we've got a lot of unknowns, a lot of gray. We don't know what this is going to look like. But the one thing that I can control is that time I spent with kids, that time I spent with that I spend with parents, just connecting and supporting them. I feel like that gives me a sense of control, and I'm able to do this because I take care of myself with my own self-care, and I think that's important. And I think we do the best we can as adults to take care of our kids. But I just love it, and it, like Rochelle said, I leave sessions and I feel filled up. So thankfully.
And I feel like talking to all three of you, and I'm going to bring everyone back. There's a sense that I have that you three are the ones who say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay, which is what any parent wants to hear. So let's bring back April and Rochelle, and to have a bit of a panel conversation and talk about COVID, this new abnormal, what we learned and how we can help. So welcome back, everyone. Thanks, all three of you. So far it appears that the ages of 15 to 21 have been hit the hardest during this pandemic and requiring more help. Why is that? Anyone jump in?
I think, as we alluded to before, that developmental task of going outside of the family home and exploring the world of peers has been restricted. And that's really the staging for identity development, which is the primary task of that age group. And so they can't do that. And so they're limited to their family relationships, or more importantly, turning towards technology and social media to feel connected, which brings a whole other host of problems.
I remember asking Danelle about that once. And Danelle, maybe you can start us on this one. Can you help me and us understand the brains of young people and why their brain process crisis or trauma differently than, say, I would? And also, could you add into that how that would affect your choice of a tattoo?
I didn't even tell my parents. Just they
Just
know.
like that.
Yeah, I'm obviously obsessed with brain development when you get a designed one on your arm. Anyway.
Wait, I want to see it. Can we see it? Everyone's saying, where is it?
Well, it's abstract. I'm an abstract artist as well, so it's an abstract brain. You have to be here. When we go live next year, perhaps.
Yes.
I will. We can have a
tattoo
memoriam to
demo. So talk about brains.
Yeah, so young brains are preparing for significant developmental changes, neurologically, biologically. We know this. The brain is under massive construction. This is where at 15 to 28, we know now it's a constant, it's in constant development, but this is the time when they're learning about decision making, that sense of self. Who am I? Intimate relationships. They're exploring relationships. They're exploring how do I do conflict. There's so many critical skills that they need to learn. And when I'm thinking of the pandemic and how some of those natural skills that they need to start learning and exploring and experiencing, they're not having those. And so they are learning how to process things differently. They're learning how to navigate fear and worry and anxiety. So we're we're delaying some of those natural patterns that they need to have, and that use it to lose it. If they don't use and create and develop and strengthen those really healthy neural pathways, then they sort of die off. And I'll use the word decay, but that sounds quite aggressive. But if you're not using these patterns or developing them, then they just kind of move aside. And then all of a sudden, their patterns are fear, anxiety, anticipation, and so it's just a really important time to let them explore and be stimulated in these new experiences, but they're not able to.
What about you, April? What's your sense of brains?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'm also seeing the impact because, this is a time of, raising dopamine, and they're supposed to be taking risks. And a lot of the things that would normally be a typical risk taking within, our society is illegal, right? And so there's a real stop to that. And these should be normal exploratory things that allow them to individuate and get that sense of autonomy. So, you see young people being so anxious about doing typical things because it's become illegal. And
Which, again, just so I'm clear, when you say illegal, you don't mean like speeding. You mean like just
no,
social gather things that we can't do.
I mean,
Yeah.
like something that's not in keeping with public health
Right.
rules at the
Right.
time, given we're in the situation we're in. And so, they end up losing those milestones. They end up losing or normalizing avoidance, right? And so that really, on some hand, some young people who are quite anxious are now normalizing avoidance, and that doesn't help them with their growth and development. So it's really a challenging time when this is supposed to be happening. They're really missing out on that.
So, Rochelle, can I ask you something on this? So, if young people in their brain development leave things unaddressed, they don't have experiences that they should have had, what are some of the common things that you see them doing, common mechanisms that somebody with mental health challenges would end up doing?
Well, as Danelle had mentioned, that fear response and needing to anticipate or control ways to soothe the system when they aren't getting what they need. That emotional heightened reactivity that is a normal feature of adolescence in response to the conditions that April's talking about, those restrictions, can look completely out of control and crazy if we don't understand and respond to it in a way that this is a normal response to an abnormal situation. And I think if we can increase that understanding, we're not going to go down that road of pathologizing and making it worse.
So what would be a normal response to this abnormal situation?
Well, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of panic. And I think that, if you don't have that understanding as a parent, you'll look at it with concern and conflict, however you may see it, if depending on how their reactivity, if it's anger response, and it turns into conflict. If we can really look at it and understand it, then instead of conflict, we can have that connection. But it can be very explosive or retreat and irrational because there's multiple realities, and if we can understand our child's reality and not defend against it, then we can increase understanding, and that connection help move them through and modulate them through these stuck points, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and I know friends of mine talk about their kids who want to watch the same movie over and over and over again, and they're trying to have these family nights where they do something and they just want to do, and they get mad, and it just is that a piece of it?
Yeah, it's that soothing, repetitive predictability. And so these are the things that we should be looking for, is not only the isolation and avoidance behaviors that anxiety can bring about, but also the rigidity. So the repetitive pattern behavior, watching the same movie as you described, or restricting certain food groups, or trying to eat clean, or The compulsive exercising, which, you know, you'd think might start off during the pandemic as a really healthy thing, but then it starts to become, if it isn't done this way at this hour, there's no flexibility or adaptability to these things, then we start to have a red flag come up.
I'm gonna ask you, anyone want to jump in? April, do you
Well, I
want to
just
jump?
wanted to say like that I've been thinking about that a lot is, I often talk about what you can control, what you can't control, and the view of the world. Like when I think of youth, they look at, okay, am I safe? Are people safe? Is the world safe? And it's really tricky because we're seeing that the world is going through obviously a global pandemic, but that people, they're probably experiencing on social media too, that people are mean, people are unkind, like with the dichotomy of anti-vax, vax, political stuff happening too. They're starting to experience like, okay, am I okay? Am I okay in this world? Am I okay with people? And because there's this fear, they're developing patterns of how do I avoid this fear and how do I retreat? And that's when, like Rochelle was saying, there is that sense of, okay, I can control watching this movie over and over again. And that actually settles my entire nervous system in all the wrong ways. So we want them to feel safe as much as we can as they're developing so that they don't live in fear, hyper fear.
And I think you both bring up really important things around the rigidity and being able to soothe, is we have seen in eating disorders, young people who, like you said, were, okay, you're going to be at home, you're going to be isolated, better be active, get on those videos and do that exercise and eat well. And all of a sudden it becomes such a pattern, it becomes rigid, their brain starts to get malnourished, and we know malnourishment causes more rigidity. And then there's a young person the parents aren't even recognizing anymore that started out with a good exercise and eating pattern, and now they're unwell, they're very unwell, and so they're showing up to the hospital sicker than they ever have, more malnourished. And so we're starting at a much lower place with a weight and medically with much younger children. And what they'll say is they never had previous eating disorder issues. They never had a fear of gaining weight or a pursuit of thinness. It was the pandemic. All of them say it was March 2020, and this is when it started. Wow. So we know, and there's studies going on to show that all of this is a cause for this. These are not pre-existing individuals with pre-existing eating disorders.
Well, and we're going to listen to someone speak in just a bit, but we will talk a little later on about what are some actual signs parents can look for and how do you know what's normal, stressy stuff and what isn't. And we'll talk about some of that. But are there positives to the pandemic? Are there things that have happened that, Rochelle, I'll start with you first and anyone else can jump in, but that you'd go, okay, there are some good things that come out of this?
I think, just that isolation where families were staying within their homes and there were eyes and ears on things that busy households weren't paying attention to. And it also, with parents having their own struggles, deep conversations and recognition and awareness started to happen in homes. So I have quite a few families that came seeking support just right there, and they realized there were pre-existing things, but it's really we really recognized it when we were all in our home together. That's a positive. The other positive that I would say is, as much as we talk about identity and limitations on identity development, I think the world events that have happened around COVID, the LGBTQ movement, truth and reconciliation, political polarization, has allowed youth to really get activated and motivated and passionate. So I do see kids' awareness, youth awareness, and taking on these things that, I don't know if we didn't have this pause and all of these things happening around us. I'm really hopeful because this is the age group, adolescents, that are going to make the changes that we need in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the positives in our house is it's allowed us more time together so that I can point out how nothing is my fault and it's all theirs. So I find that helpful. Danelle, what do you see as a positive in some of this?
Oh, and I love this part. As you probably know, I am very frustrated with technology and screen time, and I have a real passion for helping people have a healthier relationship with their time on their screens. And I think because we've been on our screens and we Zoom and we're zoomed out, that when we have an opportunity to not be on our screens, we take it. So I think youth is even like, you know what, we went to this barbecue and I didn't take my phone because they're sick of it. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Like they're actually not as they're done with it. And I really see a positive in that, which I find a little bit ironic because we're in this, hyper connection, having to be on Zoom. But when you don't have to be, they aren't as much. I'm seeing that.
April, what's an upside?
Well, I appreciate all the youth and family focused. I want to sort of kind of pull it back and look at the opportunity in the crisis for healthcare providers from the acute care all through the community at different levels. I've seen a real coming together and collaborative approach more than I've ever seen before. I'm working with emergency physicians and community pediatricians to work on protocols to meet the needs of families. I love learning from and working with therapists in the community. So I think that's a real positive. There's been more of an awareness of mental health and the importance at all levels and interventions. So I think that's a real positive in this crisis.
Well, we asked one of the young people who's been supported by Lionheart to tell us her story. So here's Ava.
I couldn't remember the girl I used to be, so I had to call my mom and ask her, what was I like as a little girl? My mom's reply, magic. Somewhere between the ages of 9 and 18, I thought my magic was stolen from me. I'm here today to talk about how the Lionheart Foundation enabled me to become the woman I am now. A definition of a name is to specify a word by which a person, place, or thing is designated. In my mind, to label. It wasn't till I was 10 years old that I come to realize the labels only grow as you age. By your gender, your income, your interests, your weight, your height, your sexual orientation, your religion. Inevitably, there's no end to how your identity and behavior is influenced by the terms you and society choose to describe yourself with. Whether positive or negative, the influence of what we whisper to ourselves daily has a great influence on our thoughts and actions. Every day we put ourselves into boxes, trying to define who we are. A name is the first thing we receive in this lifetime, the principles to which our identity is born. Naming things brings comfort, a knowing, acknowledgement. I will say that again, acknowledgement, meaning to accept the truth or existence of something. Here's my truth. I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I was taught that the creator of the universe is named Jehovah, God's name meaning causes to become. My box labeled me as a good girl, self-righteous, critical, judgmental, perfectionist. At the age of 9, I sadly lost my father to suicide. My principles were cracked open and my labels only expanded. Just approaching adolescence, I was handed the complicated emotions that came out as crazy at 16, and I certainly disliked that label. The conditions that manifested from such a great loss was fear of abandonment, low self-worth, anxiety, depression, self-harm, eating disorder, suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Essentially, my box was flipped over, cut into, and flattened. After so long of not giving myself the permission to feel, to acknowledge, my unhealed trauma cultivated itself into unhealthy coping behaviors and patterns, warranting myself to numb the thoughts and emotions, ultimately, the labels. The Lionheart Foundation gave me the tools to learn to sit with the uncomfortable emotions of trauma, to witness the sensations of grief, the loss of a father, of beliefs, but essentially the loss of myself. I was able to have the access to the help that I needed, that not many services and programs are capable of providing. With the support from my counselor and acknowledging my trauma, my journey to heal began. I've become self-aware, assertive, bright, whole, free. No longer restricting myself to the confines of a small box. to the labels that I attached myself to. I've become discerning in my thoughts and emotions, able to cope with the challenges of life's messy, as we all know. I continue to recognize my journey and to cause to become my own being in this lifetime. I wouldn't be here today recognizing my defeats and victories, my loss and gains, if it wasn't for the help I received. Therefore, no longer the good girl. No one is either good nor bad, just individuals in this lifetime striving for perfection, about 6 feet away from messy. With the right help and support, acknowledging that we are human, complex, deep, emotional beings with ideas, beliefs, passions, interests, playful, abundant, powerful to create our own becomings. They're not just comfortable boxes that we or society choose to neatly fit us into. Being comfortable in the uncomfortable is where the healing can start. It's where the Lionheart Foundation enabled me to sit with these emotions, to witness them. And I forgot to mention, my name is Ava Osborne, no longer scared to take up space.
Wow, that's Ava's story, and Ava's trauma and story are not COVID related, but April, I'm presuming some of those themes are.
Wow, I'm just taken back. What an insightful individual. And I loved that take, that the labels. And there's so much that young people feel define them. And ultimately, I think in my approach with youth, I always say they have the answers within them. And part of it is that they get defined so early, or they feel that they're in these boxes, and they have yet to realize that they have those answers within them to get through. And COVID has isolated them from the social learning and the ability to see sometimes they're more than the boundaries that are put around them. So that was really touching. I'm a bit taken back by Ava's video, for sure.
Yay, Ava. Well, we talked earlier about brains, and maybe I'll just stay with you for a minute, April. So what do I need to know that would help me see a way through with brain development and some of the challenges that these young people are going through?
Mm-hmm. Well, if, Dave, you were sitting in front of me and you said, a situation, I'd say first, well, what's the young person in your life's understanding of this issue? I always like to go to the core of how the youth sees it, and oftentimes they're brought into a care situation or a therapy situation or a medical situation when we have not asked them how they're experiencing it, and then how we can be helpful to them. And I ask the families the same thing, and you end up going with a different perspective and narrative than often when you come in saying, this is the problem. So, that's how I'm showing up for the youth, whether it was pre-COVID or COVID. I think really trying to understand the core of the individual's concern, and then exploring that in a coaching way. So I try to really emphasize non-judgment, openness, curiosity, and flexibility. And two things I often say is that try to take but and however out of your vocabulary. Use the word and. Things are really challenging, and we need to go to school and do the things we need to do, right? Instead of but. Right. And so it's teaching parents and supporting parents and coaching parents in that coaching approach that I think youth really do respond to better.
Rochelle, I'll pick on you first, but everyone can jump in. So originally, this original question was, I wanted to ask about mistakes parents make. And then all three of you very justifiably say, why do we have to make it about mistakes, Dave? And that's fair. But when we are doing our best, and I think we are, all us as the parents or the ones watching, we're doing our best, but are we missing anything? Or is there stuff that we could be thinking about or doing or stop doing that would be more helpful?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm a parent myself. I'm not going to pick on any parents. It's a tough job, and it's one of those things that aren't these black and white prescriptive kind of things to do. It really is walking that fine line, because adolescence is a transition from childhood to adulthood. And as much as they need to go off and explore, they still need us and they want us. And we need to remind ourselves as parents of that, to not just go, oh, they just need to, they're pushing me away. I'll just back off. They need us. And to be able to walk that gently by what both April and Danelle were saying, by listening, by observing, by taking an interest in their inner world and giving them the permission to feel, as Ava talked about, what would be intolerable or overwhelming or too painful to feel on their own, these emotions, to be their witness and to sit with them, help modulate or regulate that emotion, help them make meaning, as April talked about it, but not to try to fix anything. That really, as April had said, they will find that solution, but it's too overwhelming to be left with it on their own. So it's really walking that fine line of, being next to them as much as they need to, letting them go out, come back, and just don't fix, just be there and work through it with them.
I want to do that, but it's easy to get. If they're mad, I get mad. If they're isolated, I want to be isolated. Well, I say, well, fine, I'll go on my phone, or I'll go on my iPad. For either of you two, Danelle or April, what would you recommend parents try doing more of or less of?
Well, I look at places where you struggle as a parent. If it feels like, wow, I can't tolerate that bigness, that big emotional outburst, then pausing and going, why is that? Where does that come from? So we often look at intergenerational patterns of emotional avoidance. If we're numbing, escaping, or avoiding our own emotional stuff, then that's something to look at. And it's not necessarily to go to therapy. It's not, that would be amazing as well. Like if it feels like, wow, I'm getting tripped up, or this stuff it's really hard for me to sit in this discomfort. I have parents saying, I just want to take their pain away. I just want to fix. I don't want them to be in pain. But what accidentally happens when you're doing that with really good intention, you're not allowing the child to really feel as big and as much as they need to feel. So just looking at some of your roadblocks or some of the places where you get stuck, and then talking to a therapist or a partner or a friend, and making sure that you're capable and available enough to help them.
Just writing this down.
Well, I'll call you later, Dave. I've got some resources for you specifically. Don't worry. We'll talk.
Well, I'm just gonna tell Blythe, my wife, that she needs to see a therapist. I think that's
that's exactly what I was saying. Perfect.
Okay, but as a parent, what can I look for that says, okay, this is normal and this is unhealthy? What are the signs that would tell me or other parents, those of us watching, this is where you should sit up a bit?
I think one of the things that we should always be mindful of is functioning. And so what is a young person's job, right? What is their expectations at that time from a developmentally appropriate? And so young people go to school, and young people associate with their peers and their friends, and they participate in certain things. So as soon as you start to see that loss of functioning or something big changes like that, that's when you really want to say, hey, what's on your mind? What's going on for you? And what's the big challenge here for you? How can I be helpful? And really staying on top of that versus, oh, it's just a phase, or, and sort of minimizing, because sometimes you can be really overlooking even the slight change in functioning for a young person.
Rochelle, what's your thoughts? What do you look for?
You know what? I think parents, as I said, to be observant and don't be afraid to ask. Mm-hmm. Do those check-ins. One of my mentors said, make the implicit explicit. So what you're seeing, rather than assuming, explicitly ask and check. And if you're right, now you've discovered something. And if you're wrong, so you're wrong. But at least they know that you're watching and that you care.
one of the things that we're seeing significantly in the hospital system is somatic symptom disorder, which is when young people present with physical symptoms because of the heightened anxiety that they're experiencing. And that's really happening. It could be chest pain that gets worked up significantly. It could be abdominal pain. It could be just pain syndromes. It could be fainting, non-epileptic seizures. So they present with physical symptoms. So somatic means body, and then they get worked up extensively. And when you get to the core of things, it's the anxiety that's causing this because of the neural pathways. So it's neurologically based, and it's mediated from the anxiety. And yet what happens in the physical medical world is it gets worked up, and then people are told there's nothing wrong with you. And then they sense that as, oh, it's all in my head. And so it's really about educating people. Well, yeah, your central nervous system, it's called your brain. It's in your head, and that's what's mediating it all. And we've just seen exponential increase.
Well, can I add a piece to what April was saying? Because when that manifests that way, then they have to do, if it's GI stuff, as an example, stomach pain, diarrhea type somatic stuff, then they have to do elimination stuff like, okay, now let's set rules around food. And then all of a sudden we have an eating disorder. Right? Like I see that a lot. Like I have one girl that's in a recovery for her eating disorder, and she's got some stomach stuff, which I believe is anxiety based. But now her doctor is saying, okay, now you got to take out gluten, wheat, dairy. So it's tricky. So I agree that that's an important piece.
It's the tension between, right at April and May of 2020, I said to all my subspecialty colleagues, I said, mark my word, in the next 6 months, we're going to have exponential increase in somatic symptom disorder, and they're coming to you. And that was it. We have what they call functional neurological disorders, drop attacks. We have all the abdominal pain, migraines, all of these things, because in society, they feel like they can present with the physical, right? And it is real physical. But really the underlying is the anxiety. So I think it's crucial because people are on relentless pursuit of figuring out what's physically wrong with their children, and they're not necessarily open to it being an anxiety-based illness. And we're seeing so much of it. So I don't know how that can be added in, but I think it's really important to normalize for people that this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
I like this conversation.
Danelle, both you and I work with bodies, right? Like it's not just this top-down therapy, which is more cognitive behavioral. Yes, there's education in that component, but working from the bottom up, from the body, recognizing that trauma and so much emotion is held in the fascia, in the viscera, and because it's all this nervous system stuff. And so, yeah, the panic attacks, or the migraines. And so working with the body, knowing that a lot of Lionheart therapists work with the body. And that's where we're going to, hopefully, if we get it early on and recognize it as such, we can avoid going down this mystery channel of elimination diets and all these other things, because we'll get to the tummy talk, what's really happening there.
So then what do you do if you go, okay, this feels like it's a little too far? What do you do then if you think your kid needs help?
If you think that it's gone too far,
Yeah,
and
like
they're
if you,
acknowledging.
yeah, if I say, okay, I think this might be unhealthy, like who am I going to call? I know it's not Ghostbusters, but who do you call? What do you do?
Yeah, and that's a really tricky situation for a lot of parents, because they don't know, like, what do I do? Go online and Google therapy? And a lot of parents, they're not sure. They don't want to necessarily reach out to their friends and family to go, hey, I've got a problem. Do you have a therapist? And so that is a lot of why word of mouth, why Danelle and I get phone calls or emails on the regular from people going, okay, I know you don't necessarily work in this area, but how do I find a therapist for this X issue? Right. And so I think part of what this community-based foundation like Lionheart is one of those resources, one stop that you can check in and reach out and see for referrals and education in terms of what are the different types of therapy? What would be a good fit for the issue and for the individual?
That's great, because I think that's the fear, and I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't think, am I overreacting or underreacting? I don't know what to do, what to say. And as Jamila said, 403-978-5866 is the number for Lionheart. But I would suspect that that's fairly common for a lot of parents to go, A, I don't know if it's bad enough, and B, I'm getting nervous even to ask anybody. Danelle, what's your thought on that?
Well, just as Rochelle was saying, you have to make the implicit explicit and ask those questions and have the difficult conversations and say, hey, I notice cut marks on your ankles. Can you tell me about those? And having that safe place that your child can come to you. And so starting there and not jumping like secretly and going, hey, I made you an appointment for a therapist. You're going on Wednesday. Good luck. Right. So you want to look for people that can do the family work, the parenting support, the youth work, of course, individually as well. But like talking to a family doctor, but talking to the school, seeing what they're noticing. There's resources within the school if need be as well. But Lionheart, Psychology Today, Netic, like there are resources out there. But the first, like Jamila was saying, is call and talk to the intake worker and weed in and weed out what could be going on and feel supported, but ask those questions, be uncomfortable and move away from any stigma or hesitation. I'd rather you guess wrong than not guess at all. What? Yeah. Let me refer to my tattoo so I can see what I'm talking about.
Dave, the other thing I would say is that, Lionheart therapists, from what I'm aware of, work with families. And I think that that's a really important feature because, you can drop your child off to me once a week, 1 hour a week. And, if you really want to have effective change, it really comes down to that attachment relationship. And even if it's not working in the most supportive way, it is the most influential relationship. So why not? Parents are your resources. Parents are the most important people in the child's life, and the child wants their parents to get them and understand them and be the ones to support them. So I find during these times when we need to reach capacity, some of the most effective work that I'm doing and that can be done is working with parents.
And like Jamila said, price, because of Lionheart, price should not be. A lot of parents, their income has dropped because of COVID. Their financial confidence has dropped, and that's not Lionheart can help. So reach out to Lionheart. Obviously, if it's a major crisis and you're lying in bed going, I don't know if my kid's going to make it through the night, then that's where 911, or you can go to emergency. But if it's not quite that, this is where you go. I think I could talk all day with all three of you, and I do say you make me feel better, and you make me feel more confident, and you make me feel like the world is okay. I just got to be courageous enough to jump in. So thanks all three of you for doing this.
Thank you.